When you look at history, every aspect of it matters. Each facet of a civilization affects the entire picture. You can't focus on one part without seeing the influences from others. Such is the case of Black history in Anniston and Calhoun County, Alabama. Often, people looking at history focus on major events, but history is so much more than that. There are lesser but more important nuances that influenced and guided those events. In Calhoun County, the lives, struggles, and accomplishments of those who lived here day after day were the historical influence blacks made on this community and beyond. That influence began long before Anniston was even imagined. When Alabama joined the Union in 1819, the Creeks and Cherokee tribes were still arguing about whose land the region belonged to. Whites were not supposed to settle in the Indian Territory. However, when President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act of 1830 and banished the Native Americans to places like Oklahoma, the region became Benton County, and after 1832, settlers began to flood in, some bringing their slaves with them. Hardly a single piece of America was untouched by slavery. The practice traveled with white settlers almost everywhere they went, even to the Salt Lake Territory in Utah. It's almost impossible to know the exact number of black people today in Calhoun County who are direct descendants of enslaved people. Estimates suggest perhaps 90 to 97% have at least one enslaved ancestor. Those ancestors did some important work. In Alabama, slavery existed in every county, and by the time the state joined the Confederacy in 1861, enslaved people made up around 45% of the total population. In Benton County, most slaves belonged to small farmers, making a living growing small patches of corn and cotton. In 1860, around 20% of the residents of Benton County were enslaved. But because of the 3/5 compromise in the U.S. Constitution, Congress only recognized the slaves as being 12% of the population. There were 28 free blacks listed in the county's census as the Civil War began. Keep in mind, too, the area that was Benton County, that became Calhoun County in 1858, covered more than 1,000 square miles. The county ran basically from the current western boundary of the Coosa River to the Georgia state line. After the Civil War, Calhoun County was whittled down to just more than 600 square miles. Even though the land area shrank, the county population grew steadily from the 11,000 people in 1840 until it peaked around 1980 at just under 120,000 people. The number of blacks living in Calhoun County fluctuated some over the years, but today remains about 20%. Those slaves brought to Benton County didn't just work in the fields. While cotton farms dotted the region, mines were also being dug, and the Cane Creek furnace was built to process the iron ore they were digging out of them. Records indicate the furnace was on Cane Creek, near the Morrisville community, and ran mainly with slave labor, producing about 6,000 pounds of iron every day. Just as slave labor was used to build the White House in Washington, the slaves at Cane Creek made an impact producing iron used to construct the ironclad Merrimack and the Alabama state capitol. In her 1910 book, The Story of Coal and Iron in Alabama, Ethel Arms relayed a story Anniston Judge George B. Randolph told her about a slave miner that worked in those early mines.
One Saturday, one of those Negro miners by the name of Vann applied for a pass running from that day noon until the following Monday morning to visit his wife, who was a slave belonging to Captain Floyd Bush, living some 6 miles distant. Monday morning, Vann did not report for duty. A messenger was sent over to Captain Bush's as Vann was a faithful servant. It was thought he might have been taken sick.
It was then naturally suspected that the Negro had run away. Runners were started out in every direction, but nothing could be heard of the old slave. In a few days, another man was sent to the mine worked by Vann.
It seemed that the old slave had bored a tunnel under the hill to get the ore, to save the stripping of the overburden, and a cave-in had taken place, thus burying him alive. The tunnel was filled with loose earth and rock fallen from the roof, and it was many days before the body of poor old Vann was found.
When the Civil War broke out, thousands of Calhoun County men left home, joining units like the Calhoun Sharpshooters and White Plains Rangers, leaving women and children behind to manage the home front. Some slaves went off to war too. Thousands were compelled to serve the Army in support roles as cooks, laborers, wagon drivers, nurses, and so on. Confederate law expressly forbid them from being armed and serving in combat roles. Among those slaves left behind was Frank Sampler in the Choccolocco Valley. Records, which are always sketchy about slaves, indicate Sampler was born in 1850 on Samuel Morgan's plantation in Nance's Creek. He and his parents were 3 of about 14 slaves on Morgan's plantation. They were sold at auction, along with livestock and farm tools, in 1858. Sampler was sold to Caleb Morgan near DeArmonville, which is where he was when the Northern troops stormed onto the farm, according to the story he told the Anniston Star back in 1949.
I remembered how a Yankee general rode his horse right plumb in the hallway of the Morgans' home.
But he said he liked the Yankees because they gave him a lot to eat, something he hadn't had in a long time. Meantime, in another part of the valley, Ophelia Williams was on Colonel Washington Williams' plantation. She was born into slavery in 1853. Ophelia told reporters when she was 98 that the Civil War was a difficult time.
Miss Fanny moved us in the silver and stuff like that up to the hills in a cave, and we stayed there for 4 years.
Eventually, the Yankee soldiers found them and asked what they were going to do now that they were free.
And I said I was going to stay right there with Miss Fanny, and my mother said she was too.
Frank Sampler wanted a taste of that newfound freedom.
I turned 16. Then I went a-courting. But I didn't do that long because my daddy licked the fool out of me.
Frank and Ophelia were married in 1881 and lived on a little farm they had just a few miles away from the plantations where they had been slaves. They died there in the 1950s. What to do was a very pertinent question almost every freed slave had to answer. When General Sherman ended his march to the sea, sparking an end to the war, he proposed an idea. He issued Special Field Order No. 15, which stated that when a black man enlisted in military service, he could homestead with his family on any of the 40-acre plots in the 30-mile-wide swath of confiscated land stretching along the coast from Charleston, South Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida. Later, the loan of an Army mule was added to the incentive to work the land. That was the origin of the phrase 40 acres and a mule. All the freedmen had to do was join the military and move to the coast. The concept was trashed when Lincoln was killed and Andrew Johnson became president. He returned the confiscated land to the previous white owners. Another tool former slaves had was the Freedmen's Bureau. It also became an easy way some exploited the newly freed black citizens. The Lincoln administration sent people south, like Union General Wager Swain, who headed Alabama's Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. The new federal agency had an office in Jacksonville to provide humanitarian aid, legal assistance, and economic help for the former slaves and displaced whites after the Civil War. The Jacksonville office often negotiated new labor contracts, which were basically fill-in-the-blank forms between ex-slaves and their former masters to have them work as farm laborers or domestic servants. Fulfilling those contracts, many freedmen worked 10 to 12-hour days, 6 or 7 days a week. Some became sharecroppers, working the land owned by others for a portion of the crops. It was not unheard of that a landowner would renege on the contract after harvest and leave his former slave with little to nothing. Still, many blacks found a way to eke out a living in the failing economy of the South during Reconstruction.
I'd have to plow sometimes all day and night by lantern just to get enough meat to bring home to Miss Ophelia and the young'uns. I worked all up and down this creek. I've worked all over this valley. Worked harder than anybody today could ever imagine.
White supremacists were none too happy about the successes of the newly freed blacks. They wanted them to fail and looked for ways to bypass the freedoms granted them by the 13th Amendment of the Constitution. The 1865 Alabama General Assembly noted the 13th Amendment may have had some loopholes they could exploit. They noted it said slavery was ended except for crime. They also interpreted the amendment did not explicitly provide the former slaves a right to vote. This gave rise to a series of discriminatory laws now called the Black Codes. Alabama white supremacists decided if they could make the blacks criminals, charging them with minor infractions of the law, they could be jailed and then forced back into slavery on prison work gangs. Those gangs were then sent to work on farms under the convict leasing program. Town councils passed ordinances and regulations to prevent and punish vagrancy by placing the vagrant and idle into useful employment as a form of suitable security, punishment, or restraint. They also instituted poll taxes, requiring people to pay to be eligible to vote. Many blacks couldn't. When Senator John Tyler Morgan represented Alabama in Congress following the Civil War, the six-term U.S. Senator introduced and championed several bills trying to suppress blacks any way possible, even by legalized lynching. He advocated,
"It is necessary to legalize the practice of racist vigilante murder as a means of preserving white power in the Deep South."
Researchers have compiled lists indicating at least 13 lynchings occurred in Calhoun County between 1882 and 1910. Morgan served alongside Alabama Senator Edmund Pettus, and both were former Confederate generals turned Grand Dragons of the Ku Klux Klan. During Reconstruction, Morgan also suggested the forced removal of the South's entire black population to Cuba, Hawaii, and the Philippines. Morgan staunchly worked for the repeal of the 15th Amendment to the Constitution that was intended to prevent the denial of voting rights based on race, even if it meant denying everyone the right to vote.
Sometimes we must deny the right of suffrage entirely to every human being.
That 1890 statement is still often repeated today. It was a denial of such rights that sparked Oxford to carve the black community of Mooree quarters from its boundaries. The area, about a square mile, was where many of the black residents of Oxford had been segregated from the town's main population starting back in 1868. In 1890, a black man, Thomas Harris, ran to be Oxford's Justice of the Peace.
And I've since learned that there's some research that says Harris came up missing. Harris won that election, and a gentleman by the name of Whiteside, who was running for mayor of Oxford, said that if the black man won that seat, that he would go to Montgomery and have the lines of the city redrawn so that not the city, but Mooree's quarters redrawn so that they would be excluded from Oxford. Because at that time you had blacks who owned land, had a job, and they paid poll taxes, and they were able to vote. And so they had a controlling hand during that election.
And the Oxford mayor did it. It was a few years later, in July 1899, that more than 100 blacks from Mooree quarters petitioned the county's probate judge to become a town. They named it Hobson City and proudly claimed it to be the first town in Alabama founded solely by and for black citizens. S.L. Davis was elected Hobson City's first mayor. Many expected the town to fail, saying black residents didn't have what it took to make the town work, but they did. They even built an amusement park there with a steam-powered carousel at the end of a trolley line connecting them to Anniston. Angered by the success, the Oxford leaders asked the legislature and governor to dissolve the Hobson City Charter. They passed that bill in 1909, and Governor Comer signed it. Hobson City fought back in court, and a judge ruled in January of 1910 that the bill the legislature passed dissolving the charter was improperly passed, and the judge restored the city's right to exist independently. Meantime, Anniston was growing rapidly. In just 20 years, it had become the fourth most populated city in the state. Dr. Charles Thomas arrived in town in 1893, quickly becoming one of the leading black citizens in the community. Thomas and several aspiring black leaders, including James Bush, the principal of a black public school, attempted to build the Afro-Alabama Cotton Mill Company, but only managed to raise about 20% of the $100,000 they needed. In 1900, Thomas was one of many investors in the new Anniston Yarn Mill Company. Thomas was quite the real estate mogul, owning the St. Thomas Hotel on 10th Street and other buildings all over town. In 1930, during a 3-day auction, he sold a 44-room hotel, 200 lots, and 45 houses across Anniston and Oxana. Sadly, in January 1933, Dr. Thomas was stabbed to death in his barn on 16th Street as he was putting away his buggy. Another prominent black businessman of the time was Columbus C. Sykes, owner of the Bicycle Hospital. He was one of the earliest bicycle dealers in Alabama, taking advantage of the bicycle boom of the 1890s until he died in 1941. There were some folks in the early Anniston black population that were destined for national prominence. William Levi Dawson was about 13 when he ran away from his Anniston home in 1912 to study music at Tuskegee Institute under the mentorship of the school president Booker T. Washington. Dawson paid his tuition by working as a music librarian and a laborer at the school. He became an accomplished trombonist and one of America's premier black composers. His works, like the Negro Folk Symphony, were debuted at Carnegie Hall and was performed by orchestras around the world. In 1930, Dawson returned to Tuskegee to direct its School of Music, leading it to national prominence. The choir broke many color barriers, performing at Radio City Music Hall, the White House, New York's Hyde Park, and Washington, D.C.'s Constitution Hall. Another famous Calhoun County musician was Charles Cow Cow Davenport, who was taught to play piano by his mother. But his dad disapproved of his musical aspirations. He sent the young Charles to study theology at Selma University. Davenport was kicked out of that school for playing ragtime music.
So, I drifted to Birmingham. There, I was first hired as a piano player in a place down on 18th Street. Then, I began to hear other people play. There weren't so many competitors at that time. By me not knowing how to read music, I had to make up the stuff to play. The others would get interested in me and gang around the piano.
Davenport joined the vaudeville circuit, playing piano for several blues artists, creating some of his own songs like the Hobson City Stomp. He became known as one of the fathers of boogie-woogie music. One of his more famous pieces, the Cow Cow Blues, about a trained cowcatcher, gave him his nickname. Despite a stroke that crippled his hands in the 1930s, he worked to overcome that and continued to perform. Just as important as the celebrities were the common folk, like Andrew Green and his family. Green was a clothes presser in 1917. The soldier seated at the right was a member of the famous Buffalo Soldiers, a black unit of the 92nd Infantry known for its gallantry. Perhaps among the most important early black pioneers were the educators, building schools that often used hand-me-down books and supplies, if they had any at all.
We got used books to their new books. When my parents would go and stand in line, we got used books. Whether they were different from the other schools, I don't know. Because like I said, we didn't dote on that. We just doted on what we could get, what we got.
Good morning, class.
There were benefactors that helped the educators build and rebuild schools after they burned down, sometimes from mysterious circumstances. Author Kimberly Odell noted a black school was one of the first 3 Anniston public schools proposed in 1883. The principal was H.W. Conley. The Anniston Normal School and Industrial School on Walnut Street opened for blacks in 1898 and held classes there for 17 years. Many understood the need to educate the black population that had been denied an opportunity to go to school for so many decades. Booker T. Washington was a constant promoter of that concept. He worked with benefactor Anna T. Jeanes, a Philadelphia Quaker and widow, who helped fund black education by hiring teachers and building schools. The teachers were called Jeanes Supervisors. Jeanes had Washington and some others manage her $1 million endowment fund aimed to build black schools across the South. She told the board members in 1907,
"Dost thou remember when thou came to, and I gave thee $10,000 for the little country schools, and then I gave thee $100,000 more, and now I am giving all for the little schools? This is a great privilege. I am just a poor woman, and I gave it not to save my soul, but just because I wanted to."
Almost all of the near 300 Jeanes supervisors teaching across Alabama were women. Calhoun County claimed more than 30 of them. Those supervisors were also major fundraisers for another important black school building program, one provided by Julius Rosenwald, president of Sears Roebuck. Again, the effort was spearheaded by Booker T. Washington. The Rosenwald Fund records show at least 6 schools were built in Calhoun County. The fund built almost 5,000 schools in 15 states, including the Calhoun County Training School in Hobson City, headed by Professor C.E. Hanna. These schools were often aimed at teaching tradecraft, but they also had classes in math, geography, history, and English. One of the renowned students to graduate from the school was David Satcher.
Calhoun County Training School, which you might say was Hobson City High School, but it was Calhoun County Training School. It was called that because the students there were not viewed as people interested in going to college, but we were going to go to pick cotton. And so we could leave school at 1 o'clock and catch the bus to go pick cotton. And I must admit, I cheated a little bit. I said I was going to pick cotton when I was going to work at the Anniston Foundry, after I got to be like 9th and 10th grade.
Another black school was Barber Memorial Seminary, named for its benefactor, Marjorie Barber of Philadelphia. Located on 60 acres that today is near the southern edge of the Anniston Country Club and behind the Barber Terrace Apartments, it had 4 structures, including a 4-story brick and stone building housing classrooms, dormitories, a library, meeting rooms, and an infirmary for more than 100 students. It was run by the Presbyterians' Freedmen's mission efforts. The Lutheran school, located at 15th and McDaniel, is now gone, but it held classes from 1st to 12th grades. The Jacksonville Colored School was built in 1901 as a wooden school. The stone structure was built in the 1940s.
When we would get to school sometime, it would be so cold, and my big oldest brother that went with us, he would get out we had a trail, my dad and them made a trail through the woods to get to our school. And so they had a place they could put so much wood and hide it, put it out and heat it in the morning. We'd heat our hands and all, we'd be about frozen, but we were determined to go to school, so we did.
The school later became Eastwood High. Piedmont is also believed to have had a Rosenwald school for black children.
After integration started in the 60s and all, they started employing teachers, sending teachers into white schools. Like I said, they did teachers first. And they were handpicked. It was your grades. It was how you looked. If you were too black, you didn't go. They left you there. If you were too old, they left you there. But they kind of handpicked the teachers. I was sent to Norwood. Norwood was a community of middle class white people.
All of the black schools had opponents. Some white supremacists felt it was better that blacks were uneducated. Over the years, many schools were burned, some multiple times under mysterious circumstances, and had to be rebuilt. Outside of schools, blacks were limited in where they could go.
We had church in Zen Park last Sunday, and I was so amazed. I said, now here I am sitting here in Zen Park, and I couldn't walk through there. We sometimes thought we could slip through there, but we had another group of people, just for meanness. They would get after you with rocks and sticks and everything else and run you through the park.
Are you talking about it was segregated? It was the whites doing that to the blacks, or was it blacks doing that to the blacks?
Whites were doing that to blacks.
When we were growing up, there was a little hill you go up 18th Street, because that's where we went to the store. And they would, we couldn't even touch the bricks and the rocks at St. Michael. And they would keep the gates closed, locked. And I remember one of my girlfriends, she was a Cooper. She lived in Gaston after she moved from here. And she was put in jail because she was standing next to the rocks, but right back on the rocks. And a lady by the name of Mrs. Rozier cooked for the ministers at St. Michael.
Even when blacks traveled outside of Calhoun County, they had to worry about where they were welcome. Many used a booklet called the Negro Motorist Green Book, published annually to guide black travelers to lodgings, businesses, and gas stations that would serve them along the road. And it wasn't just in the Jim Crow South. These listings ranged from Florida to Minnesota and California to Maine.
When I came to Anniston, there were a fellow named Adams, Kenneth Adams. He ran a service station out further west Anniston, out beyond where I lived. He served only gas and oil, but he did not serve black people. He had signs up, we serve white customers only. And he went to that, from that to 3 others. He had 4 service stations, one on every entrance into Anniston. And he had signs up on all of them, we serve white customers only. Black people in Anniston did not stop at those stations because they knew better. And people traveling, coming into Anniston and not aware of this, many black people would pull into one of those stations, and many of them were beaten terribly bad because they did not see the sign, and yet they were not allowed to stop there.
Wood saw many violent actions of white supremacists, including the attack on the Freedom Riders bus in May 1961. He drove by as the vicious mob was attacking the bus.
Forsyth grocery store sat right along there. There was no road there at the time. This was the only road that came through, and this is where the bus started burning, and it burned down right by where you see that sign. And the bus had just stopped, and smoke was beginning to come from the bus. And I realized there was a problem, and I pulled up and stopped and jumped out of my car. There were several carloads of white people, and they made me get back in my car and get away from there. And I did. I got back in my car and drove down the road, half a mile, I guess, where I could find a place to turn around, and came back. And when I got back, it was unbelievable how that bus had burned that fast. It had to be gasoline, because I understand that they threw what we call Molotov cocktails on the bus. It's a bottle with a rag and gasoline. And the passengers were laying all outside of the highway, crying and hollering, and it was not something that you want to see every day.
During World War II, the Calhoun County Junior Red Cross chapters were instrumental in supporting the war effort, assisting in any way possible with blood drives and scrap collection, but even those efforts were divided by race. The chapters were segregated, and at first, black blood donors were turned away. Months later, after a huge backlash from medical professionals across the country, they began accepting blood from blacks, but segregated it and only provided it to wounded black soldiers. Over time, the black churches in Calhoun County became a focal point, trying to overcome the obstacles to freedom.
But the church was our rock. Anytime before anything took place, we had mass meetings on Sunday. You remember I mentioned about certain stores wouldn't hire? We came to the church and had mass meetings, the community. And how we got that out was through the barber shops and the beauty salon, in the community. Sunday evening at 6 o'clock, be at 17th Street Baptist Church. We're gonna have a mass meeting. What's going on this time? Well, on Noble, they don't have not one black at Fields, they don't have one at Hudson, so we need to address that. Reverend Reynolds and Reverend Ellis gonna talk with them, but when they come back, if they're not finna hire anybody, we're gonna march in front of the store. And we done that.
We never marched. We never protested before we went to church and prayed. Prayer and song kept the movement going. When we sang, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, we meant that. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. When we sang, I shall not be moved, just like a tree planted by the rivers of waters, I will not be moved. We were determined, but it was our religious faith, it was the expression of our faith that kept us going, that enabled us to face what we faced.
Professor Hanna was, I don't know what you would call it.
He was a graduate.
He was always trying to do something. I remember, I can just barely remember when the NAACP first came out. He was in church organizing, trying to organize people, for the NAACP. He was a man that just busy. I just put it that way.
Alabama tried to outlaw the NAACP in 1956 when the Alabama Attorney General filed a lawsuit saying they didn't register with the state as an out-of-state organization. The NAACP took the case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court and won. The list of civil rights organizations operating in the state at the time was long, and the scrutiny of those groups went all the way to the top. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, unleashed a covert surveillance operation called COINTELPRO, targeting subversive civil rights groups and black leaders, including the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., Elijah Muhammad, the Black Panther Party, and many others. The FBI's objective was to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the radical fight for black rights, black power, the Klan, and even the women's liberation movement. They not only placed illegal microphones in hotel rooms and meeting places and conducted warrantless wiretaps, they started misinformation campaigns to try and turn these groups and individuals against one another. Presidents Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon were all aware of what the FBI was doing from the 1950s to the 1970s. It was made public when a group of students broke into an FBI office and stole papers that detailed the operation and made them public to newspapers and Congress.
We have a particular obligation to examine the NSA in light of its tremendous potential for abuse. It has the capacity to monitor the private conversations of American citizens without the use of a bug or a tap. The interception of international communication signals sent through the air is the job of NSA, and thanks to modern technological developments, it does its job very well. The danger lies in the ability of the NSA to turn its awesome technology against domestic communication.
One of the COINTELPRO informants was Klan member Gary Thomas Rowe. It's believed that he was involved in planning the Anniston Freedom Riders bus burning and the bombing of Birmingham's 16th Street Baptist Church in 1961 that killed 4 little girls. He was also in the car with Klansmen during the 1965 drive-by killing of a white woman ferrying black marchers between Montgomery and Selma. Rowe eventually told Congress some of the things he did, but was protected from prosecution by federal authorities who put him in the Witness Protection Program. The Anniston Human Relations Council was a local civil rights group formed in 1963. The council included influential black pastors, including Nimrod Q. Reynolds and William B. McLean, white ministers like Reverend J. Phillips Noble, and the city leaders, including Commissioner Miller Sproul. They pursued desegregation of public spaces like the public library through negotiation and organized nonviolent action following the violent backlash against the Freedom Riders. Reynolds and McLean were both badly beaten the day they tried to peacefully enter the Anniston Carnegie Library. They were attacked, stoned, and shot at by a group of 50 to 100 white supremacists who were there to try and stop them. Their car was also smashed.
And Reverend McLean, who was one of the people who was beaten, Reynolds was beaten worse than McLean, so he was home in bed. And in order to keep down violence or whatever might have happened, McLean preached that night. And I don't think I've ever heard a sermon quite like. But he was able to calm the people down, and after the service was over, people went home, went to bed. That was a blessing.
Reynolds and McLean and others peacefully entered the library the next day. McLean went on to teach at several universities, including Boston College and Harvard, and became Professor Emeritus of Wesley Seminary in Washington, D.C., and senior pastor at Methodist churches all throughout the Northeast. But he never forgot the message he carried to the pulpit and segregated lunch counters in Anniston.
I think that the church has a responsibility to aid in the education of people in terms of history, in terms of black history, in terms of and to see black history as a part of American history. My goodness, what has happened here? You can't even talk about American history without talking about slavery, about black people, about the presence of black people in America.
In the early 60s, Alabama decided that in order to vote, you must pass a literacy test. It was another effort to quash the voting rights of blacks because the voter registrar could decide if the voter that failed could go ahead and vote. Records indicate many whites who failed were allowed to vote.
But no, I had to take a test, and I wasn't the only one. That would be about 4 of us in the room, and then later on they'd have somebody else. But I just know I have my certificate. I kept it.
The Voting Rights Act of 1965 ended the use of literacy tests. A natural question would be, what drove these people fighting and struggling to overcome overwhelming odds? In most cases, tenacity.
I was raised by my parents and others around us to believe that I could do anything regardless of what other people said. My dad was a smart man who never finished the first grade, and yet he was superintendent of Sunday school for 25 years. And he actually taught himself to read with the help of my mother. And my mother, of course, never went past the 5th grade. So they were just tremendous people.
And to keep the black community informed, Reverend John Nettles, pastor of the Mount Olive Church for more than 3 decades, became publisher and editor of the Anniston Crusader newspaper, a weekly publication with a circulation of more than 10,000. He also founded a tri-county youth development program called Prodigy, became state vice president of the NAACP, commissioner of the Anniston Housing Authority, and an associate member of the State Board of Pardons and Paroles. Many Calhoun County residents joined other events during the civil rights struggle, like those who went to Selma in 1965.
Last Sunday, more than 8,000 of us started on a mighty walk from Selma, Alabama. They told us we wouldn't get here. There were those who said that we would get here only over their dead bodies. Well, that's it. All the world today knows that we are here and we are standing before the forces of power in the state of Alabama saying we ain't gonna let nobody turn us around.
Because some will always fight equality, the road will always be difficult. But the goal of equality will always be a righteous one.
I say it ain't about the black or the white. I say it's what's right. If you can do what's right, then you're a friend of mine. But everybody make mistakes. Everybody got their own thoughts and beliefs. But you're reading the Bible a lot of times. Don't meet a foreigner. You know what it meant? Don't meet somebody like me and you and him met today. I ain't supposed to treat y'all as foreigners. We're the same. We're the same.